I used to be pro-choice, and I thought my take on the abortion rights issue was ironclad until I was confronted with science. So today I'm going to tell my story about how I went from pro-choice to pro-life and why. And if you're on the fence or even on the other side, I'd like to encourage you to stick around. Listen with an open mind. We don't have to agree to listen and understand each other. And maybe you won't hear a new argument today, but maybe you will. And if nothing else, maybe you'll hear somebody on the other side of this issue speaking to you with love and concern for you and for the women this issue affects and their families. Welcome to the Mom Apologist, where apologetics meets discipleship. This is a safe place for your doubts, where we seek to answer the question, God is real, the Bible's true, now what? So join me as we learn to think biblically about how we walk through this life as believers, struggling with tough questions, seeking hope, and finding answers together. This week was the March for Life. I decided that I would record an episode about this topic because I think it's really relevant to discuss. I used to be pro-choice. That probably sounds a little odd for a Christian apologist. Now, if you haven't listened to any of my previous episodes where I talk about my journey of faith and how I fell away for a time, I'm going to just summarize and let you know that I would have always called myself a Christian. Even the times I kind of leaned more agnostic or even kind of tried to dabble in atheism, if somebody had said, "What faith are you?" I would have said Christian, because I wasn't Buddhist, I wasn't Hindu, I wasn't Muslim. I was a Christian in that sense, very cultural Christian, but I certainly didn't always live like one. There were times I lived in ways that silenced God's voice in my life and was very me-centric. But I still would have called myself a Christian, even if I didn't have a very close relationship with God. Now, my understanding of theology was very surface level and not comprehensive. I couldn't have explained how the pieces of the Bible fit together or what it meant to understand the whole counsel of Scripture. I understood using a verse to justify something, but I didn't understand how we have to look at the whole Bible and all of the verses that relate to that topic, not just one verse to build an entire structure of an idea. But even in that state, I knew that the Bible does say things about life and when it begins. The Bible says that God chose me before the formation of the world in Ephesians 1:4, that he formed me in my mother's womb, Jeremiah 1:5, and knit together every fiber of my being in Psalm 139, verse 13, with a plan for the good works that I would do before the creation of the universe in Ephesians 2:10. Now, in my mind, as a Christian, these verses told me that life began at conception, that we are alive in the womb. But because I believed that based on scripture references and my faith, I felt that it was a religious belief, and I didn't have any right to force people to believe that life begins at conception because it was a religious belief, and we have freedom of religion in this country. I was personally against abortion, would not have gotten one myself, and wouldn't have recommended it for anyone who asked for my advice. But I believed I could support other people's right to choose because the belief about when life started was religious belief, until I realized it wasn't. And the moment that my mind began to change on that was when I first saw a 3D ultrasound. This was new technology. It wasn't like today where everybody gets a 3D ultrasound. It was only for high-risk pregnancies. And these two babies being born into my family a couple of decades ago, I saw their faces. I saw every detail, their little fingers, their cheeks. I could tell by looking at the pictures which one was the boy and which one was the girl, most likely. Like, all of a sudden, the clump of cells line that I had told myself, that I had believed, just disintegrated. That was the moment that my mindset started to shift. But it wasn't instantaneous. It wasn't like I woke up one day pro-choice and the next day was pro-life. It was a long journey of gradual changes. So I want to encourage those of you that are pro-life, who have pro-choice people that are your friends and family, understand that you're not going to change anyone's opinion in one conversation. Give them something to think about. Be gracious, be loving. If nothing else, let them leave the conversation feeling the love of Jesus Christ and hearing maybe a little bit of truth that might start them on the journey toward truth. Because I realized in that moment that I had believed the slogans instead of researching the truth for myself. When I started to research the truth for myself, I started to see that the belief about when life begins isn't actually a religious one. It's scientific. Virtually every person who works in embryology, the experts on when life begins, especially for those who work in like IVF, they know when human life begins. They will often add a zinc solution to the petri dish because it then causes a light, a spark that we can see when the sperm and egg meet and conception happens. And the brighter the light, the stronger the embryo. So we know scientifically when that moment where the egg and the sperm meet, that is when a human life begins. The egg and sperm aren't alive in the same sense that human beings are alive. They can't grow, they don't change, they don't develop, they don't metabolize. So while people will sometimes argue that they are a life in and of themselves, they're not until they meet. When they meet, that is when an entirely unique set of DNA that is unrepeatable ever is formed. When I started to research that, I realized that life doesn't begin at conception because my Bible says so. My Bible says so because life begins at conception. The Bible's just reporting what is true. That is when I realized the flaw in my argument. And I started to look beneath all the propaganda that I had heard, all the slogans we chant, my body, my choice. It's just a clump of cells. It's not a person. Women's rights, reproductive justice, all those propaganda slogans. I started to ask myself, well, what do they really mean? Have I asked myself the hard questions? Am I willing to look at the other side and consider if I've got this wrong? So, what do we mean by life? Well, if we found a fetus at any stage of development on Mars, what would we call it? We'd call it life. And they call it life if they find half a bacteria. So we know it's life, we just tend to deny it. But what is the definition of life or living matter? And that is something that shows certain attributes: responsiveness, growth, metabolism, energy transformation, and reproduction. Obviously, reproduction in the womb is the cell reproduction, but the baby has the capacity to reproduce. Obviously, it won't do so for a while, but a woman is born with all the eggs in her body that she will ever have. So you're actually carrying the next generation with you when you're pregnant with a daughter. So we see all of these capacities are present in the fetus from the moment of conception all the way through birth. So by any definition, the embryo demonstrates these characteristics in some capacity from the moment of conception. It's alive. It's life. and it's human. So why do we have such a hard time admitting this? Because it interferes with our meology. We know that taking innocent human life is wrong, so we have to justify it. And we do that in the same way some primitive tribes did. Everybody in the tribe was people, and those outside were not people. And different tribes would have different terms for these things, but that's basically what it was. They separated who was people and who was not people so that they could take the lives of the others without having to call it murder. So it wasn't murder to kill somebody who was not people. But that's the same way slave owners justified the way they treated their slaves. They weren't people. They weren't human. Because we know that when we look at a human being, that they have a right to life. We know that when we look at human beings at the early stages of development and we choose not to see them as human, that we are making a judgment that is not based in science. If their parents are human, that is a human life. So why do we do that? Because if it's human, and it is, if it's alive, and it is, or we wouldn't need to kill it and remove it, then we have no right to end its life without just cause. And you say, well, just cause, it could be mental health. It's hard to be pregnant. It could be dangerous. Okay, so we need to talk about what is just cause. Well, the word just is the important part here. Just means fair. So we don't end a person's life for anything less than a life-ending cause. It has to be just. Now, the only time we might have a life-ending cause that is a just reason to end a pregnancy would be the life of the mother exception. However, if you ask medical professionals, they will agree there's no need for an abortion to save the life of a mother. We may need to deliver a baby early. We don't need to deliberately take its life. There is no medical reason why we have to deliberately inject a poison into a baby's heart. There's no reason to rip her limbs off in the womb. Depending on where in the pregnancy the woman is, if she's got a situation where continuing the pregnancy would end her life, we remove the pregnancy. We deliver, if possible. In an ectopic pregnancy, there's no way to do that yet, but we remove the baby alive, if possible. It may not survive if it's not near viability, so we provide palliative care. We offer it comfort. If it's near viability, we offer the best medical care we can and hope that we can keep the baby alive. There is never a medical need to end the life of the baby, rip their limbs off or crush their heads. We don't need to starve them or inject them in their heart. We don't take a person's life in exchange for morning sickness or feeling terrible or being exhausted or having to rearrange your work schedule or college classes or having to change your life plan. Even great inconveniences are not just in comparison to taking a life. One of the myths that I discovered is that life of the mother is almost never the reason that a woman is seeking an abortion. Virtually every abortion in America is for convenience of some sort. It might be affordability, it might just be selfishness. But less than 1 to 1.5% is due to rape or incest, and life of the mother is also a very tiny percentage. And most of those get treated medically, so they don't even qualify as an abortion. First, you say, well, I am a person and the baby is not. But that's a philosophical argument, which is closer to a religious belief than science. Scientifically, there is no difference between a human and a person. If you're human, you're a person. Everything else is philosophy. Like, if we destroy a bald eagle's egg, it's punishable by a huge fine. I think it's $100,000 or $200,000. Why? Because you're destroying what's already a bald eagle at an early stage of development. It's not potentially a bald eagle. Even if something happens due to natural circumstances and it never develops, it is at that moment a bald eagle at that stage of development. Just like a human being at various stages of development might not look the way we think humans look, but that's exactly how all of us looked at that stage of development. We don't interfere with the process of a bald eagle developing into an adult bald eagle because it's already a bald eagle. It already has value in our legal system's eyes because it's our national bird. Side note, I think it's really sad that our culture's gotten to a place where we protect animals more than we protect human beings. There are a couple of videos floating around right now where people are asked to sign a petition against the removing limbs from puppies in the womb and aborting puppies because they're unwanted. And then when they're asked to sign the same petition for human beings, they walk away disgusted. Their response was the puppies are cuter than the babies. There's something wrong when someone sees a human life as disposable, but is willing to save a puppy instead. A lot of this hinges on the idea that it doesn't look the way we think a person looks. And we have a hard time empathizing because it's so foreign or it's so little. So we're going to talk about the fact that we don't discriminate based on size. A taller person's not worth more than a smaller person. We don't discriminate based on their level of development. A 2-year-old's not less valuable than a 16-year-old or a 25-year-old. A 90-year-old isn't less valuable because they're on the other spectrum of development. We don't discriminate based on their environment. You're not worth more based on where you are. In the womb, out of the womb, in America, in China. Your life is still the same value because your life's worth is not dependent on how other people feel about you or where you are. Degree of dependency is another reason we don't discriminate. We don't discriminate because someone needs to be on life support. We don't discriminate because somebody needs medical care. We don't discriminate because somebody needs insulin. These are all people that are dependent to some degree. We don't discriminate against people that need a wheelchair or crutches or an in-home nurse. To some degree, we're all dependent on each other. That's how humans live. We are social beings. We don't kill people because they are dependent on us. So that's what we call the SLED argument: size, level of development, environment, or degree of dependency. Because there are born people that are alive, that have memories and opinions, that their size is different, or their degree of development is different, or they're dependent, or they're in an environment that's different. We don't discriminate. We don't take life based on those standards. Dr. Seuss got this one right. A person's a person, no matter how small. I think one of the reasons why it's easier for us to consider abortion acceptable is because we can't see the baby. Even though we can on a sonogram, we can't see what's happening. We can't see them cry or play or smile or fight against the tools trying to take their lives. We can't see them scream. We can't hear their voices. And it makes it easier for us to deny the truth. There's a movie called The Silent Scream, and it was actually produced by Dr. Bernard Nathanson, who was one of the largest pro-abortion advocates in the country until he realized the truth of what he was doing. And then he became one of the strongest pro-life advocates. And you can find this on YouTube, and it's a sonogram of an abortion procedure. And it's very interesting to watch. It's hard to watch because it's a very young, I think it's a first trimester or just over, and the baby clearly feels pain, clearly is trying to get away. What I think is interesting is that the abortion provider watched the movie and never performed another abortion. There's something about seeing what we're doing that makes it real. And when we can't see it, it makes it easier to just say, well, it's just a do-over. I'm just going to take this pill. I'm going to have this procedure and I'll get to move on with my life as if nothing happened. But abortion's not really like that, which leads us to the topic of rape and incest. These are traumas, but we don't cure a trauma by adding another trauma. We need to support these women with real mental health help, walking beside them through the challenges of being unwillingly pregnant, potentially as a young person. But we don't kill someone for the crimes of their father. In this country, we don't even execute the rapist. Why would we execute the innocent victim, the result of the rape? Now, what if the mother is very young, whom the pregnancy would be physically impossible or difficult? Well, we don't have to abort. We let the pregnancy continue as long as it's safe for the mother and for the baby. And if it becomes unsafe at any point, we deliver the baby. And if the baby is too little to survive, we mourn that loss, but we don't intentionally take the human life. I'm not saying this is easy. It would be incredibly difficult for an 11, 12-year-old girl to go through a pregnancy. Emotionally challenging, but so is ending a pregnancy. I have a lot of friends that are my age and older that went through an abortion because they got pregnant unintentionally at a young age. They were told this was the best thing for them to do. And they've got significant trauma. Abortion has mental, emotional, spiritual, and often physical consequences that last a lifetime. If we're pro-women, then that means supporting women in making the best decision that they can make, even in hard situations. Can I interrupt for just a second and ask you, if you're enjoying this podcast, if you feel like this is beneficial, please like, follow, and subscribe. Leave a review, share. It really helps get our content in front of more people who need to be encouraged. There are good reasons for what we believe, and that there are good reasons for what we believe and why we believe it. It really matters when you help. Thank you. So when we're talking about difficult situations like rape or incest, or even maybe somebody who's in a situation of poverty, what if the baby will end up in poverty or in foster care? Don't you know how many children are already in the foster care system? Well, for one, if we're going to support women in crisis pregnancies, we want to remove the crisis, not the pregnancy. Their babies honestly are less likely to end up in the foster care system if we can offer them that kind of support, help them get economic support, help them qualify for programs like food stamps or WIC, help them get more education or job training or learn how to write a resume. There are so many ways we can support a woman who is pregnant in being able to continue her pregnancy and have a successful life. Some children are going to end up in the foster care system because we live in a broken world where people mistreat each other. Most women who choose to keep their babies end up parenting them and don't end up with their children in the foster care system. The foster care system is difficult. It's not a perfect system, but we're not suggesting that we go kill all the kids in foster care because their lives are hard. Why would we kill kids that might potentially end up in foster care? That doesn't seem to make any sense. We can agree that foster care needs revision, that the various state agencies need revision, need more oversight, need more help. There are ways we can work to create a better system for kids that need temporary care or whose parents need to not be parenting for a short period of time or need to earn their right to parent back. Yes, but let's not take innocent human life because there's a system that we need to fix. We all face hardship. We don't take innocent life because it might face hardship. Hardship's part of being human. It's like death and taxes. It's just part of the deal. For the women who choose to carry their pregnancy but don't want to parent, most of those babies go into what we call private adoption. Private adoption is a totally different system than foster care. In fact, there are 2 million families waiting for an infant to adopt right now. If we ended abortion tomorrow, there would be enough families for every child put up for adoption and then some. There would be no children left over. I think that's one of the myths that the abortion industry pushes, is that there's not enough families for all these babies. And that's just not true. The reason there are children still in the foster care system is totally separate than infant adoption. A lot of the kids left in the foster care system are there because the parents' rights haven't been severed, because they've been through so much trauma that it's hard to find a family who's equipped to deal with that trauma. So the solution isn't to kill innocent humans, it's to fix the system and better equip parents to deal with kids who've already suffered and give them the best shot at life. One of the most common objections I hear is the bodily autonomy or consent argument. The baby doesn't have a right to use my body without my consent. Or you might hear consent to sex isn't consent to pregnancy. So let's look at those ideas just briefly. If you participate in the only act that can result in the creation of a human life, you are consenting to the possibility of parenting. It's like if you go to Vegas and gamble, you're consenting to lose your money. Now, you might win, but you might not. If you play, you're consenting to whatever outcome you get. That's part of gambling. When you have sex, you're consenting to all the possible consequences of that act, whether it can be a lifelong loving relationship, a pregnancy, a one-night stand, or an STD. Consenting to sex is consenting to the consequences that can only come from that act. Secondly, parents have a unique responsibility to their children because they've created them. If you choose to perform the act that creates human life, you are responsible for it. You can't create someone dependent on you and then kill them because you don't want them to be dependent on you. That's not just. That's not fair. Now, when I was pro-choice, none of these arguments really made a dent in my heart and mind until I started to consider whether or not I maybe had this wrong. Looking at those babies in that 3D image, those babies that I already loved, I realized that every baby's far more than a clump of cells, and that I'd been sold a slogan instead of science. It took me a long time, though, to go from that moment to realizing abortion really takes the desires of the adult and exchanges it for the life of the child. We don't want to be pregnant right now. Pregnancy would ruin our college chances, would make our parents mad, would end our career. But the reality is 9 months of the worst pregnancy possible, short of being life and death situation, is still just an inconvenience compared to taking a life. A person who might live 100 years, might cure cancer, or dance in just the cutest little Swan Lake ballet, or say the word yogurt wrong until she's 8. Every human life is full of potential. These aren't potential lives. These are lives with potential. And we don't have a right to take that away from somebody without just cause. And 100% of abortions fail that standard. When I realized that, that's when I became pro-life for all babies. Not because I want women to suffer, but because I believe that babies are worth it. Because I believe that loving women looks different than telling them to kill their children. Did you know that around 70% of women were coerced into getting an abortion? That doesn't sound like choice to me. Did you know abortion protects a lot of rapists, child molesters, pimps, and sex traffickers? They use abortion to keep their women able to work and able to sell them for sex. I don't think protecting women turns a blind eye to that kind of abuse and victimization. It looks like reporting the abuse and supporting them through their pregnancy, whether they choose to parent or put the baby up for adoption, and giving them those tools we talked about, an education, getting them equipped with food stamps or housing, teaching them how to get their high school diploma or go to college. We can provide all kinds of support. A lot of pregnancy centers even offer counseling for the couple so that they can be better parents, have a better relationship for the parent, the mom, the dad. A lot of places will even offer counseling for people who've already had an abortion or a father who's lost a baby to abortion. When we support people through hard things instead of trying to remove the evidence, which doesn't really end the trauma, it just pushes it down the road. When I saw the difference between what pro-choice really is, it's the ultimate euphemism. They don't offer any choices. They don't offer prenatal care. They don't offer adoption services. They offer abortion. That's not a real choice. Real choice looks at that innocent human life and recognizes that its choices matter too. And taking an innocent human life intentionally is always wrong. Now, even if you're on the other side of this discussion, I hope you'll consider some of the points I've made. Look beneath the slogans and decide what's really true. Look at the science. Investigate the abortion industry and how much of what they do is for the financial rewards. Are they taking lives, selling baby parts? We know that that's true. Maybe what you've been told about abortion isn't true. Maybe the slogans you've heard or chanted aren't the solid arguments you thought they were. That's what I did. And that's when I became pro-life and eventually an adoptive parent. And I think that's important to note because most pro-life people do more than just talk the talk. We walk the walk. We donate the most time and money. We're more likely to be foster and adoptive parents than any other group. Now, if you're pregnant and not sure what you want to do, I want to encourage you to find a pregnancy resource center. We don't want you to suffer. We want you to thrive. We want to offer you the help you need to be prepared to carry your child and parent well, or find the right adoption situation for you. There are free confidential services available. You can go to mychoicenetwork.org and find a clinic nearby, or visit optionline.org and they can chat or talk. You can call 1-800-712-HELP, 1-800-712-HELP, or respond through text the word helpline to 313131 at any time. You're not alone. You can connect with caring, confidential professionals and really learn what choices you have. We are anxiously waiting to love you, walk with you through this time, and we hope you choose life for the baby and for yourself and all those in your family. Until next time, keep seeking truth, hold fast to faith, and never be afraid to ask those tough questions because God has answers.